Welcome to Narrative Responsibility, a podcast about examining the meta story of your life, how well it is serving you, and how to change it for the better. I'm Elena Wolf, relationship coach and life alignment mentor, and this is this week's New Perspective.
Hi there! I'm so glad you're here today. This is episode 50, Synthetic Thinking. The notion of what constitutes thinking versus perception or comprehension has been swirling around many of my episodes in 2025, specifically numbers 43, 48, and 49. Or, if you're looking for keywords, frogs, murderbot, kink. In many ways, this episode is a companion piece to The Frogs, the Poets, and the Fools, because that episode was all about pulling apart the intent and goal of mindfulness as emptying the mind of a particular type of thinking, not emptying the mind of all perception, which, of course, required a bit of defining of terms and differentiating thinking from awareness. There's definitely going to be some conceptual overlap here, sort of taking the same starting point, but then going in a different direction with it, or from it. Thus, part of what I will go over today is the word and concept of thinking and thoughts. Like, what do we mean when we say we are thinking about something? Is that a specific process? A process toward a specific goal? Or just generally anything that we're doing more with our mind than our body? This leads to a concept I called synthetic thinking or synthetic thought. The other half of this episode then is to unpack that idea. Like, what is synthetic thinking? What does it look like? What is its function? What is the purpose of that type of thought over maybe some of the more problematic types of thought? And is it a difference in kind or simply in intent? Ideally, you'll come away with some useful considerations for how to direct your own thinking to be more synthetic and less repetitive. But first, I want to talk about the word thinking itself. I'm exploring this question because of another conversation with my friend, similar to the one about the word understanding. And yes, in fact, we do talk about these kind of concepts a lot. Cognition and consciousness is an interest that we share, and we are both absolutely the kind of nerds who love getting really granular about the minutiae of understanding. We also enjoy having these conversations with each other because we come at the subject of consciousness from very different places. Me from a how does understanding cognitively help us feel it somatically kind of lens, and him from a let's experience it somatically, not analyze it cognitively lens. So sometime in the last year, we had a really confusing disconnect in a discussion of something else. Emotional processing, maybe, that made us stop and say, wait, maybe we need to define some terms here. What do you mean when you say thinking? His understanding of thinking is a lot narrower than mine. Based on his training and the more body-led approaches of working that he uses professionally, he sees thinking as a very mind-oriented activity. It's analytic, logical, a top-down framework being imposed onto experience. His view of thinking is that it's not necessarily useless or wrong in its conclusions, but at best it is incomplete. Sometimes it is unnecessary, and at worst it is actively impeding what needs to happen or what is happening. Thinking from this view is often a defense against full somatic experiencing. That is, really feeling with the body whatever emotion or energy is happening. This aligns pretty closely to the concept of thinking that in mindfulness is contra to the desired state of presence. In contrast, I use thinking much more broadly to mean essentially anything my consciousness is actively doing. For me, this includes both the expected uses, analysis, mathematical calculations, category assignments, so forth, and also less logical and less clearly mental processes, like unpacking sudden intuitions, processing emotions through imagery and poetry, and actively tuning into my body signals to discern what action or choice is aligned for me. To me, because my awareness is engaged in those tasks in a way that moves them forward, like it's not just observing them, it's doing something with them, those tasks are thinking. To my friend, those would be more like tasks of processing or discovery, but not thinking per se, because they lack an analytic or interpretive or impositional energy. Now, this back and forth about what constitutes thinking versus not might sound pedantic, but this kind of word meaning difference actually has pretty real consequences when people are trying to communicate. You see, we're both using the same word to represent two different ideas. The abstraction beneath the sounds, the phonemes that we're making, the abstraction beneath them is not the same. Therefore, we are using different, if closely related, words. But we don't realize it because they sound the same, and those abstract meanings are so closely related. So if we continue to have a dialogue where we're using different words that we think are the same, then we're not going to be able to understand each other's perspective. Only when we uncover this gap in word meaning and correct for it can we actually create a shared understanding, a shared dialogue. What brought this gap to our attention more specifically was him expressing concern at how in my head I am, when to me, I am more embodied and attuned to my emotional and physical bodies than I ever have been. There might also have been an accusation of me being an overthinker. Obviously, since neither of these comments really square to how I experience myself, I pushed back on them. And that led to him explaining how he hears the word thinking and me being able to say, oh, but I also encompass this, this, and this when I use it. So I described some of the actual processes I was referring to and let him suggest words that fit his lexicon better. And from there, we had a much more productive and less confusing dialogue. But to me, all the things I was describing were, and still are, encompassed by the term thinking. This exchange with my friend was definitely in my mind when I was working on the script for The Frogs, the Poets, and the Fools. Is having an active awareness of your mind the same as being in your mind versus in your body or in the moment? Is having thoughts the same as thinking? Is having a lot of thoughts about something or spending a lot of time thinking about something the same as overthinking? My friend's definition of thinking was actually what helped me understand what mindfulness proponents meant when they talked about turning off the thinking mind and just not thinking for a while. Which got me thinking. While I certainly can exhaust myself with the wrong ratio of active thinking versus just kind of floating on the surface of my brain waves and my perceptual qualia, I don't really engage all that often in the mental processes that fit into the more narrow definition of thinking, the more problematic definition of thinking. The reason I don't consider myself to be an overthinker, especially, is this. My thoughts are always an attempt to move things forward. Either I'm trying to solve a problem, to make sense of something, to find a new pathway to advance a situation, or to understand my own reactions. When I have reached a point of information synthesis where all angles have been considered, all facts are accounted for by the current theory of reality, and understanding cannot move forward without some kind of change, like a new input or something being removed from the data set. Like until new input comes in, my mind literally stops engaging with that subject. If there is nothing more to synthesize, then there is no reason to keep thinking about it. Either I've uncovered an action to take, in which case I go and take that action and then see what changes as a result of it, what information I get from it, or I reach a sort of internal stasis and that subject goes into standby mode, waiting for something more to happen. Unless and until it does, my work is complete. Like, it is synthesized. I don't have to think about that anymore. So from my perspective, I think to the furthest extent of its utility and no further, which means that my thinking always has a purpose. And I don't just mean a coherence in the way that someone using problematic thinking to avoid getting emotionally flooded or something has a subconscious purpose for the behavior. I mean like an actual goal, a specific state or outcome that is intended to be produced or arrived at by the thinking process. Enter the term synthetic thinking. I remember using this phrase in at least the rough draft of one of this year's consciousness episodes. I don't remember offhand if it made it into the episode, and if it did I stop to define it or just kind of use the term and move on? I vaguely remember writing out a definition in one of the scripts and then removing it because it was kind of ancillary to the main point and ended up feeling distracting. But did I take the actual phrase out with it or just the explanation? Either way, fam, this is me circling back. Seriously, no experience is ever wasted. No ideas either, unless you want them to be. Anyway, synthetic thinking. In a really broad way, the concept of synthetic thinking, at least how I mean it, someone else might have coined this term at some point to mean something else, but how I am intending this phrase to be meant. Synthetic thinking is an activity of the mind which is aimed at producing something, a new or enhanced understanding of an idea or experience, a new or deepened insight, progress on a piece of creative work, a novel concept or a novel connection between concepts, a plan or an update to a plan, a solution to a problem, a definition for something which had been undefined, a specific direction to move toward, whether in life, research, project execution, whatever. It's thought that produces something which either was not there before the thought or was not visible to the conscious awareness without the thought. Synthesis is a forging of new meaning or new connections as a result of converging multiple streams of data, experience, information, or theory into one united whole. Synthetic thinking is an attempt to arrive at a synthesis understanding of the current sum of all information and experience, whether we're talking literally like all of a person's experience or simply all of their information and experience with a specific topic, the topic at hand. As such, then, synthetic thinking is fundamentally a creative process. Creative as in creating, as in generating, as in making. Not necessarily creative as in wild leaps of imagination or ideas that have never been seen before. Sometimes that is the end result of the synthesis, but other times the endpoint will be a reaffirmation of what had been previously synthesized, or a separately derived perspective that aligns to common knowledge, or a perspective at least that someone else has already articulated. But for the person who independently synthesized that perspective, it will be more grounded and more meaningful than if they simply accepted that point of view from the outside in. I like the term synthetic thinking both because it relates to the end game of the process, synthesis of information, and also because it suggests deliberate movement and industry. Now, this is admittedly an older meaning of the word synthetic as to be produced or moved forward rather than as artificial. So no, this idea really has nothing to do with AI because right now, the algorithmic iteration programs cannot, in fact, think. They can only replicate an appearance of thought or an approximation of the products of synthetic thinking. Currently, humans are still the only ones capable of true synthetic thinking. And we are all capable of synthetic thinking that seeks to expand our aperture of awareness, just as we are also all capable of problematic thinking that is a deliberate, whether conscious or not, attempt to narrow our aperture of awareness. So, how come some of us are more likely to engage in self-limiting thinking rather than synthetic thinking? I think there's probably like 3 primary drivers of it: innate temperament, training, and willingness to have been wrong. Possibly this could also be condensed just to temperament and training. Qualities like curiosity and a burning drive to understand can encourage synthetic thinking. Certainly those drive mine. I believe strong metacognition or awareness of our own thought patterns and layers of mind also encourage synthetic thinking. Yeah, check. Having a general goal orientation and a neurochemical reward system that prioritizes achievement of desired outcomes probably also contributes to synthetic thinking. Check. Intuitively recognizing that failure is simply a rerouting of the path to success, and you just have to go back to a prior point and then move forward in a different way, probably also prioritizes synthetic thinking. Again, check. All of these contributors feel like they can be either or both temperament and skill development, which would be training. I personally have a cognitive template that finds enjoyment in synthetic thinking and metacognition and weaving together complex layers of information to reveal a deeper truth, but then also going out and getting stuff done. I think for the purpose of taking action. I think so that my enriched understanding can inform my relationship to the world itself. I think in ways that propel me forward because I enjoy both those mental activities and the results they help me create. Because of those enjoyments, I have spent a lot of time at synthetic thinking tasks and therefore built skill with them. And that combination of enjoyment and skill creates an upward spiral of self-reinforcing behaviors. The thing feels good to do, so you do it and thereby gain skill. And being able to do the thing with more skill makes it even more enjoyable, so you do it even more and thereby gain even more skill. So now you enjoy it even more, etc., on up the spiral path to mastery. For someone like me with INTJ type preferences in the Myers-Briggs system, synthetic thinking is probably the single most powerful self-reinforcing process that we can experience. That is our zone of mastery, part of our type's particular genius and contribution to the broader human experience. It's kind of what we do, darling. So yeah, for me, synthetic thinking is my default. I can't not do it unless I am deliberately using sensory input to create something like internal stillness. Pretty much anything my mind engages with is an attempt to push it forward. For someone else who maybe doesn't have the internal push to synthesize every piece of experience they have into one unified understanding of life, the universe, and everything, someone who doesn't feel energized by solving puzzles or finding solutions to problems or setting down their own point of view to see a situation from literally any perspective besides their own. For someone like that, there might not be a lot of skill built with synthetic thinking because the processes which build that skill are not autotelic for them. That is, the processes are not rewarding independent of the result. But that doesn't mean that they can't build up those skills. It just takes a more deliberate and disciplined effort to do it. This is the training part. So even if you lack the innate temperamental drive towards synthetic thinking, you can still choose to train up the skills involved in it. Some of them specifically are the skills of being wrong and embracing change. Those can be learned and deliberately practiced. The willingness to consider and reconsider one's positions as a set of information changes, that can be cultivated. The capacity to audit your own beliefs and assumptions about the world rather than remaining deferential to authority or past experience without any kind of critical examination, that can be nurtured. You can review the beliefs and behaviors that you inherited from your family, your culture, your socioeconomic class, your language itself, and the way it categorizes the world. You can review them and consider how much of them are really relevant and helpful for you now, as your life is now, and how much of them are simply an inheritance, a tradition that you've never questioned, that maybe nobody for generations has stopped to question. You can learn to look for the opportunities in challenges. How can you get creative instead of just accepting defeat? How can you practice self-management or self-supportive skills rather than surrender to coping patterns that cause harm elsewhere in your life? How can you remain yourself despite the circumstances you were in? You can learn to view making mistakes as an act of coming closer to what is correct and true rather than an ego hit or something to be ashamed of. You can learn to deliberately seek more information in order to see if that alters your perception of a situation or your feelings about it. All of these are skills of synthetic thinking because they expand either what you are seeing, what you are doing, or your internal capacity to be more true to yourself and less reactive to external circumstances. Here, I want to fold back in this idea of thinking and embodiment as being opposed states. That if you are doing one, then you are not doing the other. Because I feel like, at least for me, the processes of synthetic thinking sometimes actually form a bridge between those two states of being. This is also a point where it might help to side quest into listing out some of the things that I would personally classify as thinking, and more specifically as types of synthetic thinking, in order to ground this kind of abstract discussion into more specific experiences. I came up with 19 categories of things I consider to be synthetic thinking. So I'm going to try to be brief. Some of these types of synthetic thinking I feel are pretty self-explanatory because English has a clear meaning for the word or phrase that I'm using, and I'm using them kind of in that common way. But also, if you're not sure on what I mean by any of them, or just really curious to learn more about any of them and what I'm kind of specifically meaning, I will put a handout on my Patreon page that lists them out with a longer explanation for each one. So, number 1, analyzing, categorizing, and calculating. This is one of the key things of thinking in its most narrow definition, right? Number 2, mapping or trellising information onto a larger internal framework of understanding. And this is basically the details are only relevant if they can be placed within their broader context. So it's kind of the process of filing them into that context. Predictive modeling, number 3. Number 4, visualizing, or me trying to use my brain as an AutoCAD program. Number 5, explaining, kind of putting into an order that can be coherent layers of concepts and sort of what is prime versus derived within those concepts so that they could be explained to someone else in a cohesive, memorable way. Number 6, strategic vision formation and planning. Number 7, project management. Specifically, this is the tracking of parts to whole, not necessarily tasks in and of themselves, because that is number 8, awareness management, task management, time management. Number 9, Associative connections. Kind of thinking, what is this related to? Or what does this remind me of that I already know? And that's in contrast to number 10, brainstorming, which is seeking out new connections, new pathways, innovations. Like, where can I take this from here? 11, meta-thinking, examining my own thought processes. 12, running scenarios, basically projecting how a situation might go in order to get a strategy in place for my behavior and my self-management. And sometimes this also helps me to figure out how I am feeling about something or someone. Number 13, perspective shifting, deliberately setting down my perspective in favor of a different one, whether that is another person's or kind of zooming out to a wider timeline or a wider environmental context. Number 14, what I call perspective absorbing. This is where I kind of layer all the information that I know about someone else in order to create a model of their internal experience that I can kind of inhabit from the inside out. This is what I think is called entering someone else's phenomenological world. But I like to think of it as absorbing their perspective. Number 15, introspection. Number 16, retrospection, or recontextualizing the past and or the present based on new information or maybe a new understanding of the past. Number 17, self-expression, specifically creative output for the sake of articulating a very specific feeling or experience that I want other people to be able to understand. Number 18, harmonizing, what I call the process of kind of measuring my actions against my inner compass of values, principles for my behavior, needs, and goals. And finally, 19, focusing. I am using Eugene Gendlin's term for this. It is a process of tuning into the body's implicit meaning in order to fully self-witness and process emotional responses. He talks about this a lot as a felt sense thing, but I view it as kind of a synthetic thinking thing because you are deliberately engaging in a process in order to move your understanding forward. But it's an understanding of emotional experience and body experience. Is it thinking? I mean, that's what we're talking about, right? So I tried to group all of those with the more obvious thinking stuff, like the narrower definition of thinking, the potentially using thinking to not feel your feelings kind of thinking. I put those processes at the top of the list, and then the more ambiguous, what is this really, should it even be called thinking, kinds of processes toward the bottom. But I could not find the clear line between these two categories, because even at the end, the three processes that work directly with emotional material still have aspects that I would call thinking. And many of the ones that are less personal still seem to draw on aspects of awareness and experiential knowledge that are outside of the realm of the purely analytical, categorical, logical. But listing all that out also does not really capture my experience of synthetic thinking. What the labels for the different processes cannot convey is that many of those processes make my whole body light up with excitement and interest. They can't convey how happy and engaged and eager I am to discover something new at the end of a line of thought. How I feel useful and satisfied and fulfilled to find a solution for a problem or to generate a unified perspective. The times I feel the full extent of emotion unfurling through my entire body and my consciousness as a result of the thinking. In that kind of moment, I am so achingly attuned to myself that it's like this piercing note in a symphony that makes everything else kind of quiver in resonance. It's this piercing awareness of emotion and beingness. The description cannot convey the fact that many of these thinking processes are more like discovery processes than anything I am creating or imposing. The processes of thought might be in my mind, but I am not purely of my mind, and the rest of me is called on or called forth by most of these processes. Synthetic thinking, then, is using the mind to advance some aspect of self or experience. Sometimes what is being advanced is another mental, thinking-oriented construct, like a theory, a model, a plan. But other times, what is being shifted and moved forward is emotional contact, interoceptive awareness, inhabitants of the present moment, integration between my consciousness and my body itself, the body my consciousness inhabits, or even a spiritual connection to someone or something beyond myself. The key meaning in the term is from the adjective synthetic, that quality of advancement, the movement, the changing as a direct result of that synthesizing process. At the same time, what else am I supposed to call all of these movements of my consciousness, if not thoughts and thinking? So zooming back out to the initial argument, my friend is not wrong in that the word thinking is often used more narrowly than how I use it. Thinking is logic, analyzing by if this, then that rules, using a model or categories to define something, engaging with the idea of a thing rather than engaging with the thing itself. Like there is this implication sometimes of being removed from the experience or the information or the rest of the body and soul. So is my broad definition of thinking an artifact of my particular cognition with my heightened meta-thinking and inexorable internal generator for synthetic thought? Or do I just have a wider definition of thinking because, in fact, both definitions do exist in our language and have validity? Have you ever considered this question? What do you mean when you use the word thinking? Is your understanding of it more narrow or more general? And what does synthetic thinking look like for you? Did I miss any forms of it that you use? Come weigh in on these important debates at my Patreon, patreon.com/narrative responsibility. And I will again put a handout listing out all 19 forms of synthetic thinking and what I mean by them. If you want to learn more about my work as a coach, you can check out thepatternbreaker.com. And until next time, what part of your story are you going to take responsibility for this week?